worried that you might be the cool kid? You wear the latest fashions on top of all the trends? Or have you ever worried you were too much in the mainstream? Always so generic, more normal than your friends? Well, we've devised a test to put to rest your fears. There's no need to panic if you lend us your ears. Tonight you can sleep easy after all that you've heard. Cause if you like the show, then you're probably a nerd. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all.
Well, welcome aboard, everybody, to another episode of the It's Canon podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things Lego, the podcast where we talk about all things pop culture, the podcast where we talk about everything geek, everything Star Wars, everything that you could want to talk about, even wrestling sometimes, comic books. I'm telling you, it's all in canon. And this week we have a special episode being brought to you with Tyler.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the one we've been talking about. The what director is actually the most profitable? What is the best director to have behind your movie? And whether or not this all started with the question of whether or not Zack Snyder and J.J. Abrams and Michael Bay specifically, I think it was those three.
Yeah, those would be three of the usual suspects.
That we were like, are these dudes really worth it? And I started going really obsessive into the data behind how much their movies cost to make, how much they bring in at the box office, and whether or not that's worth it. So we're going to have some fun games, some fun discussions on that. We learned a lot of stuff in the process. I'm going to send Phil the link to the Excel file that I'm relying on for a bunch of this. Oh. And I'm going to... when we're done, so we can go in the show notes for the audience. And I'm going to include why, for those who could take a look at it, I just stopped doing it partway through because I found a bunch of links of people who did the work already. And multiple directors break the model, but not the directors you probably think. So,
nice.
We're going to start with a couple of flags up front. All this information, I have tried to flag and not include anything from the COVID era.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because anything in the COVID era, the numbers are weird. And I know Spider-Man made a whack ton of money, but would it have made more without COVID?
That's true, right? Well, basically, we're into a position now where everything's messed up because of COVID. We're not sure what the model is going forward now. So all of this is kind of anecdotal, historic data assumptions that we're going to be making.
Yeah, and it's really hard to extrapolate. We're also going with box office because that is the publicly easily available information. And I was able to get and secure some really good numbers for what Hollywood and what investors want on their box office. Not for everyone, but for a lot of, by the numbers Hollywood investment, the idea is you're after that box office and everything after it is just gravy.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I was reading something today on social media where there was recently a movie that released into the theaters, and their claim was the movie cost $120 million to make, and the worldwide box office came in at, I think, 135 or 139 million for its first weekend, and they were like, well, that means there's going to be a sequel, and my immediate thought was, not necessarily, because I'm like, you know what, the returns on movies don't necessarily dictate if it's profitable, there's going to be more. The degree of profitability would be what I would think is what's necessary for investors to return to that risk.
Well,
right?
It's that.
Because the sequels never really do quite as well as the original. If the original is just scraping by worldwide, not even in the major domestic market it's probably targeted at, I have concerns about that.
We're going to talk about that some more as we go, because I pick up what you're laying down. That feels intuitive. But as we're going to see, once you start getting into this new transmedia, huge conglomerations, your MCUs, your DCEUs, the sequel can do better, a lot better. And how much of it is toy sales? How much of it is video game sales that tie in? So there's a lot here. And off the top, if y'all like this and you want us to delve into other things related, let us know in the comments or email Boris or yell at us on social media. Phil's going to give you those links at the end. But I would love to go into the editor questions on some of these, but literally it was a matter of that is so far in the weeds that we didn't know if anyone was going to care or not.
I'll do a hit right off the top actually for us. I'm just going to let people know that you can track us down on our website at www.itscanonpodcast.com. You can hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at It's Canon Podcast. And you can email us at show@itscanonpodcast.com. So I just want that information to be there up front, just in case you don't make it to the end and listen to our boring spiel then.
Woo! Also, it's worth noting, I didn't include streaming or direct-to-video films from any of these people, solely because what those profitability is such a black hole, and I was not able to get the sources in time for the show to figure those out. So we're just talking directors at the box office.
It's just like Nintendo guarding their online sales.
Yeah.
We don't know. We only get retail.
So up top, I'm gonna flag everything with a quick question for Phil and a fun little thing three genres. There are three genres of film that outperform everything else by a wide margin. One of those three genres is horror, and this is for ROI. This is for the money in to the money out.
That doesn't
not for sheer box office pull, because if you're doing a sheer box office pull, it's science fiction and it's action. But for return on investment, there are three genres that beat everyone else by a mile. Number one is horror. Not number one. One of the three is horror. What do you think the other two are? And I'll give you a clue. Both of these probably actually beat horror in terms of money in to money out.
Money in to money out is a loaded question, because obviously you've kind of tipped a hand in saying the action / sci-fi, but I think that the money in is really high on that front.
That's exactly what the concern is.
That one I don't think is as easy to quantify. It's obviously horror to me is synonymous with horror is kind of jokingly low budget, right?
A lot of horror is low budget.
You're getting B-class actors, maybe a B-class story, and people love the kitsch, and maybe it far outdoes what you thought it would do, and it really gains traction in the theater. So I totally buy that.
Yeah.
That was the easy one for me.
Yeah, it's why. Yeah. What are the other two genres?
A comedy.
No.
A comedy, because I'm thinking production costs would be lower.
Nope.
If it's a modest comedy. Wow.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Romantic drama.
Nope, also wrong.
Damn it.
The best two ROIs are, in order, porn.
I was going to say, if we're classifying porn in this, I didn't want to go there.
Here's the thing. If, viewer, you were to point out, hey, porn doesn't have theatrical releases anymore. Correct. It used to. And the most profitable movie of all time based upon return on investment. And the reason we use return on investment here is because you don't have to change dollars. You don't have to worry about inflation, because ROI is a ratio question.
Okay.
The most profitable movie of all time is Deep Throat.
Oh, yeah.
Because on a budget of $25,000, the film Deep Throat came out in 1972
dear Lord.
and made $22 million in 1970s money. That is a return on investment of 90,000%.
So Jim Henson and Frank Oz made up 50% of that return, right? From the stories back in the day with what those two gentlemen would find themselves doing in the afternoon in a movie theater.
Yeah.
Okay, like observing cinema. I'm not insinuating anything else.
Yeah. And the other one is Christian films. So the
Oh,
second biggest return on investment of a film ever is actually Facing the Giants, which is a sports movie and a Christian drama.
oh,
So then you have Paranormal Activity, which is horror. And the fourth is Fireproof, which is from 2008. The budget was $500,000 and the profit was $57 million.
whoa!
So let's talk really quickly about Christian movies. These movies often make, everything I've found is, they top out. I think the most I've seen one make is only like $100 million. So they aren't like, they're making profits, but they don't make your $500 million.
Right.
But the other side of it is Christian movies are able to operate on ludicrously low budgets. Like,
Well, it's
so yeah.
based programming, right? Like,
Yep.
It's got an audience that it
Mhm.
delivers to.
Yep.
The audience is going to consume it, and then the thing is that I would honestly, sincerely believe that I think the audience, like the patron for that movie, knows or has a strong belief that the money's going to be used, like, to a good cause. In
Well,
their opinion,
we're not going to dig into that issue because Maggie
don't wanna go
Mainfish has done some awesome reporting on where that money actually goes.
and I
But-
would imagine that that's quite a little cottage industry. Yes.
Yes. So Facing the Giants, which made a profit of $38 million, had a budget of $100,000. In movie terms, that is literally nothing.
Yes.
Fireproof had a budget of $500,000 and made a profit of $57 million. What it's worth noting is the reason Christian movies have such good ROIs is those tiny budgets. And that is because a lot of the time, your major stars are working below rate.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, your sets are all donated. Your craft services and food is all donated. And in movies like Fireproof, which includes a lot about being a firefighter, the city of Albany, New York, gave access to all, like, their entire fire station, members of their fire crew, all of their like kit and stuff, free of charge to making this movie. Yeah, it was just free of charge. So it's worth noting that means New York State government funds subsidized that movie. It's a fun little thing. But yeah, Christian movies and porn are the best too, in terms of your money in to your money out.
Who would have thought those two were riding shotgun? Man,
Yeah.
like, talk about uneasy partnerships there.
Yep.
I just, I want to go back to the porn thing for a second.
Sure.
And the internet has changed the way pornography is obviously consumed in a massive way.
Yep.
I can't even conceive of how it is profitable right now, in the sense that I guess there's this whole benign industry of just ads and whatnot. But it blows me away that at one point you would be like, hey, what's going on tonight? Thinking about going to see a movie. Oh, yeah? Which movie? I was thinking, there's this new sci-fi epic starting up. No, I'm going to go play with my gentleman bits at the porn theater. Like, and that's a thing. Like, I can't imagine what went on in these theaters obviously predate anything that I was capable of encountering as an adult. I can't even imagine how seedy, excuse the pun, that whole thing was.
So, I mean, there's a lot of bits to actually break down there. I'm happy to do. I'm actually happy to do this quick diversion.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm just curious
because I actually know offhand. So part of it was, if you actually go back as far as like the 1930s, 1940s, part of why movie theaters would just run films back to back to back to back to back, especially in big cities like New York, and they knew that there was a lot of sex and stuff happening in the theater. And the reason was because it was a dark place that you could find a modicum of privacy. And if you're looking at the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and you're a young single person, you don't usually have your own apartment, much less your own bedroom a lot of the time.
Right.
You might live in a boarding house, which means that you're not allowed to bring members of the other gender over. Boarding house is where you'd live in someone else's home, usually with like a dozen other people, which each would have a bedroom, and there'd be the person who runs the house, it's their house, and they would literally like, they would make your meals and tell you like when your curfew was and when meals were, and it was a very weird, different thing. So that's part of what propped up that industry for a while, and the movie theater industry. And pornographic films just kind of extended that of, part of it was young people of all sorts of genders and sexualities were looking for a private place that was dark and had covering noise. And sometimes those movies would just be like literally anything that has enough noise that if, let's say, the cops were to come in to do an indecency charge, you would probably be able to hear them before they heard you.
Yeah. It all makes sense now. I want to put out the warning to the audience about this, and it's a nice benign warning. It's not an explicit one. But I did read an article based off of those points.
Yep.
Saying the reason why you should never do that in a movie theater today.
Yep.
Okay. Is because they're monitoring the crowd with night vision camera gear. And it's not to catch the perviness. It's to catch the people trying to record the movies.
Yep.
But they catch the people doing the pervy stuff. The minute the pants come off or certain motions are occurring, the staff know to go in and break it up and ask them to leave.
Yeah.
So, kids, ladies and gentlemen, behave yourself at the movie theater. Thank you very much.
Yes. So, with all that out of the way, it's worth noting that I didn't include any overtly Christian director stuff in here, or any porn director stuff in here, because number one, those are like their own sub niches.
Yes.
And rock on for either one of those. If that's your cup of tea, rock on. It's a free market. Do what you want.
Yeah. Enjoy.
But it is very strange to try to compare God's Not Dead to the work of J.J. Abrams in terms of ROI, right? Like it feels like we're comparing unlike things.
Yep.
And I am flagging, like, God's Not Dead is one of the top 25 movies of all time for ROI. Like, these Christian movies make bank on their investment.
That's good. Good for them. I won't be watching them. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, we tried to focus on the directors that are doing your big blockbusters and how much they're making.
Hey, it's pop culture. It's a pop culture podcast. It's not a Christian pornography podcast. So I'm going to up the relevant data.
Yeah. I'm going to start up front with the two directors that broke all of my equations, and I couldn't use them because, for very different reasons, they just broke everything. Any guesses on who they are, Phil? So these like big names.
Big names.
Huge names. One of them might be the person who has, and I couldn't find a source to specifically say this, but I think is the person with the most blockbusters directed of all time.
Whoa.
I think. So, the other one is Spike Lee, and the reason we pulled Spike Lee is because he does drastically different kinds of movies.
Yeah.
Right? Because he'll do your Inside Man, which is like a traditional thriller, but then he'll do like Do the Right Thing, which is like a comedy about racism in New York, but it's like a black comedy. If you've ever seen it, like that ending is brutal. But he very consciously does movies like that, knowing they will not have a very good ROI. But he does because he thinks it's important, and it's important to the art.
He's passionate about it. He's passionate about it.
100%. And I agree with him. I'm like, rock on, make your movies. But it means that like the data for him is so weird because he'll have movies that make like solid returns. It's your Inside Man, which is a good movie. But then he has all these movies that don't earn back their money. So it makes Spike Lee look like a terrible director by this metric.
I think the other one might be. Oh man, it's so big. I don't know. I'm just gonna throw it out there, and I know I'm wrong. George Lucas.
Oh no, George Lucas almost breaks the numbers, but it's actually the person who does more. Spielberg.
Yeah, I was thinking
because Spielberg does so much that it just messes up a bunch of the algorithms. So
you see, like that's where I was thinking George was, because George's movies usually aren't even about the movies. It's all about the subsidiary deals on investment and the toys and the merch and the this and the that, and it's just so difficult to categorize what the totals are unless you're looking at just an isolated box office. But even then, someone like Spielberg does a lot of different shit.
We're going to swing around back to George. We're not done talking about George.
Okay.
The issue with Spielberg is he has so many movies. And we're just doing movies he's directed. Dude's directed over 25 blockbusters.
Yeah.
His average profit per film is a surprisingly small $100 million. But that's because he does everything from the BFG, which I think is his worst performing movie ever, all the way up to E.T., which is his best performing movie ever.
Yeah.
In terms of profitability. But he does so much, and he does so many weird different things, that the algorithm doesn't explain him well.
Yeah. I can, you know what, like, to be honest, I would think that even if you tried to do that with Spielberg, I think it would have to be a time-based thing, like his early to mid work. And then once he made it, like, you know what I mean? You could say once he got to E.T., then at that point beyond, he had the Midas touch, and the numbers just don't make sense, right? Because Spielberg, like, let's face it, can basically take a crap in a jar, and people are going to just splank down the money and just go, I'm going to go see it because Steven said it was good.
I mean, it's worth remembering he has 4 movies that didn't break back. He has 4 movies between 2000 and 2017 that did not earn back that were non-profitable.
Really?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Big Friendly Giant, Adventures of Tintin, Munich, AI Artificial Intelligence.
None of those shocked me.
I mean, I was surprised by Adventures of Tintin, but I just thought it was a very charming movie. But I also think that it was one of those movies that I think did better on, because I remember it hit Netflix and people went nuts for it.
There's no doubt in my mind, I've never seen it, but there's no doubt in my mind that it would do well on a streaming service.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think it would do well? I think that to me sounds like a vanity project, in the sense that he knows there's a good story. It was something he grew up with, and he wanted to pay it back. Like, he wanted to do a solid. It's just like if George Lucas was doing Flash Gordon.
Yep.
Would I think that it's a good movie, what George Lucas did? God, no. It's probably going to be hokier than Hoke. But would George be happy with it? Yes, because that's what he grew up watching. Yeah. Right? And it feels to me like that would be that. So that doesn't surprise me. My biggest one would maybe be artificial intelligence. But around the same time, you had Minority Report come out, which I guess did well enough because of the star power in that versus Haley Joel Osment on AI. And that was a challenging movie. I still think it's good, though. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the crap out of that. Made me feel really weird about a lot of stuff. But those were good questions to feel weird about.
Yeah. Yeah. And very much if you look at Spielberg's movies, they kind of fit into 4 clusters. And it's really his non-profitable movies, which interestingly are all after the year 2000. He's got his kind of mid-tier movies in terms of profitability, which is Arnestad, Minority Report, The Terminal, Warhorse, Bridge of Spies, and Hook.
Makes sense.
He then has his solidly profitable movies, which there's a lot, but at the high end is Lost World, Jurassic Park, and the low end is Schindler's List.
Makes sense.
And then he has his real good profit movies, which is E.T., Jurassic Park, Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Where do you? I wonder where Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That was a competition. No, it was Jaws and Star Wars, the competition, and
Yep.
Jaws won.
Close Encounters barely made a profit of more than $100 million.
That's one of my favorites by him.
Great movie.
Yep.
But,
Yeah, that and Poltergeist.
Yep.
Like,
I mean, I think that neither of those movies is going to turn up again in any of our discussions today.
And that's okay. But I'm going to give those movies a shout out because it's a lot of the time people forget that, well, maybe not with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but with Poltergeist, I think it's easy to overlook the fact that Steven Spielberg was highly involved in that. So,
yeah.
It
and
doesn't
again,
really strike me as his type of movie.
We only talk about directors as well in this, which is then it's like a whole other thing.
Yeah, then you're talking about production. And
So, we're now going to get into the ROI numbers. So for our audience, ROI means that for every dollar you get in, you're going to get X back on average. So we're going to talk about George Lucas right now really quick because he's a real good example and the numbers start to break and look weird with him. If you look at George Lucas's entire career and you average all the movies he directed, which is only 6 movies.
Yeah, it's low.
For every dollar you invested into a George Lucas film, you would earn an average of $46 and 1.5 cents back.
That's not bad.
That is very good. He is probably one of the best ROIs you can get on a director.
Yeah. Almost $50 back on a buck.
Yeah.
Man, give that man 100 of them.
And part of what breaks that is not Star Wars.
Right.
It's American Graffiti.
Yeah.
Which had, for every dollar invested into American Graffiti, you would have gotten $180.20 back.
Yeah, because that was the breakout.
Yep.
That was the holy crap. Where has this guy been? Who is
Yep.
this guy? And it also spoke to a very wide audience, right? Like that was a time captured in a bottle, and people really enjoyed going to it, right? Like it reminded an older generation of their youth. So good on them.
100%. It's just that's where like movies like that throw off averages because averages are always weird.
Yeah, but what's another one that probably didn't do well? THX.
THX, every dollar in, you still made $3.
Yeah,
which
but
as
that's
will
on the lower end of the scale.
100%.
Still
Well,
good, but
as we're going to see, that's not as bad as you think it is. So really quickly, some data points I got for contextualizing this stuff. On average, only 3 out of every 10 Hollywood movies make their money back.
Wow, that's an abysmal.
Only 3 out of 10 are 3 out of 10 are profitable. 7 out of 10 are non-profitable, and the idea is that those 3 need to make enough money to pay for the other 7.
Okay.
Before anyone says that sounds like really bad, it's worth noting that when I took corporate finance and classes on investing, investors often use the same model, but they say 1 in 10 needs to be profitable.
Oof.
And just that 1 needs to outperform everything else.
Holy cow.
And it's worth noting, right? Like those 7 aren't all in the shitter. Like some of those can be like, oh, we're short a couple mil.
Yeah, fair. They might not be hemorrhaging money.
Yep.
They might just be underperforming for what the hope was.
Yep. So for an indie films, for every dollar you put in, the goal is to give an average of between $1.10 and $1.25 back to your investors.
Okay. So
for a Hollywood movie, the goal is $1.30 on average.
Oof.
Right? So just keep those numbers in mind. Right? So $1.30 would mean you are hitting the average of what Hollywood wants to see. which also means you're not going to get any more work.
Right. Man, that's an interesting set of numbers to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Like, really, like, this is a tight margin industry. Way tighter than I thought it would have been.
Yeah. And this is, and again, part of that is because it's those movies that don't make money. And it's also, I think, why you see a lot more sequels and stuff nowadays is they are so much less risky, right? You're almost installing a base floor of what you're going to make back.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So after George Lucas, who do you think was the next best return on investment director I found?
Oh, I
honestly... I'll give you a hint. At the time I was prepping this data, he only had 2 movies that had hit theaters that he directed.
Taika Waititi?
No, Taika had a few movies that didn't do very well, and it pulls him way down. It's Jordan Peele.
Okay.
For every $1 you put into Jordan Peele, you get an average of $34.76 back.
Wow. And what has Jordan Peele done? His name's not jumping out at me here.
Get Out.
Okay.
Which had an ROI of $56.76.
Ooh. Paid
and Us, which had a return on investment of $12.76.
Still pretty good change.
Both horror movies, it's worth noting.
Wow.
But much more like accessible horror movies. Also, Jordan Peele is now currently considered to be like the guy who helped bring back horror.
Okay.
Right? Like,
totally fair.
If you go to the theaters right now and you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of horror, partly it's because of, word in the street is it's partly because of him and how good those 2 movies are. He's got a new one coming out soon called Nope. Yeah.
And here's something that I'll just say as a tangent.
Yeah.
All right, for our listeners. I don't know your personal feelings about horror movies, Tyler.
Love them.
Okay, for me, I'm not a fan of them at
Yep.
all. Now, when I was growing up, my mom used to watch, actually, this is going to sound really twisted. My mom and I would watch Nightmare on Elm Street together. And her point in making me watch it was, number one, I wanted to see it because at the time, the pop culture was so much around Freddy Krueger.
Yep.
And my mom wanted to watch it with me. Number one, because she actually enjoyed it. Number two, she enjoyed dispelling the horror of it.
Mm-hmm.
She enjoyed deconstructing it for me so that it didn't scare me as much.
That's a solid mom.
Right? Like, she's just like, no, you see, that's fake blood. That's, this doesn't happen in real life. But she really took away the fun of the horror movie in a lot of ways too.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point I'd see stuff like Poltergeist and it would freak me out. And I guess this was my parents' reaction to it, was to, tackle it in a more family way of viewing it. But as a result, I just don't enjoy the genre anymore. And it's not because it's really like the mystique is lost on me. I went and I saw the Blair Witch Project and stuff like that. I caught on to certain pop culture trends with it. But to this day, I don't enjoy horrors at all. I had a girlfriend who was right into them. And I'm like, no, not doing it for me. Sorry. It's just,
fair enough.
I have no interest in the genre. I've totally missed out on the Scream thing, all that. But I respect the crap out of people who enjoy them, like yourself and your partner and anybody else who finds some nice time together getting scared shitless. I get a bigger kick out of things like Stranger Things and whatnot when there's a pop culture angle to it. I enjoy that a little bit more.
Makes sense. So do you want to hit a couple of weird directors next, or do you want to start talking comic movies?
Oh no, let's do some weird directors first, because I have this feeling we're going to take the bloom off the rose for comic book movies.
It's very weird. So three weird directors. We're going to talk Scorsese,
okay,
Quentin Tarantino,
Ooh.
and Ridley Scott.
Oh, okay.
Which
Two
one of
those are
them do you think you should invest in?
I think it's going to be probably Quentin.
It is. For each buck you give Quentin Tarantino, you get an average of $7.17 back.
That's a good return because I see both of those other directors as doing a lot of big misses.
Yep.
So,
It is worth noting that, like, Quentin Tarantino has only had one movie that didn't make its money back.
Was that Murphy Brown?
Oh, that was Death Proof.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Death Proof didn't make its money back, and partly because that was a very weird movie.
Yeah.
It was NC-17 or X-rated, depending where you were, which hurts a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, the Grindhouse movie pairing, because it was also, I don't know if you'll remember, but it was a two-parter. You got to see Death Proof and... Oh, shoot, what was the other one? It was a two-part. It was two movies back-to-back. It was Quentin Tarantino's did Death Proof, and Robert Rodriguez did a movie that I can't remember right now.
I forget it, but I remember them being marketed together.
Yeah. And it was very weird and, like, a very fun experience, but, like, it was not designed to make money off the box office.
Yeah, because the two of them had collaborated with Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
Remember that? George Clooney.
Yeah.
That type of thing. And you could definitely tell when Robert Rodriguez took over in that movie. Because they were at the titty twister, we all remember.
Yep.
You see, I went through this thing of really worshiping Quentin Tarantino and just thinking he was the most brilliant movie maker of all time. And I started falling off the wagon around Death Proof.
I mean, Death Proof was he just wanted to do a funny bit.
Yeah, and I don't
good or
blame him.
bad.
It just didn't hit for me. And then, on returning to some of the other stuff when he started getting back into it, like Django Unchained, and then, you know what I mean? Like, he started getting back into the storytelling, and I was just like, I really enjoy the intricate story and you know what I mean? Like, everything about it. I just really enjoy when Quentin gets his teeth into something that's got a lot of meat to it, instead of depicting, the meat house, grindhouse, Death Proof thing.
It is worth noting that Quentin Tarantino suffers from what a lot of other directors also suffer from, which is after your couple of breakout hits, regularly they tend to revert towards a mean of between $3 and $4.50 per movie, and we're gonna see that a lot. Sorry, per dollar in.
Well, you
right?
can only have a breakout like one time, right? Like, you can only surprise people once. Like, holy shit, Reservoir Dogs. My God. Right?
I mean, so Reservoir Dogs made $11 for every buck you put in, but was not his breakout.
What was Pulp Fiction?
$25.74 per dollar you put in.
That was his breakout.
Yep.
But
Jackie Brown was... Yep.
Sorry. Go ahead with Jackie. I'm curious.
Jackie Brown and Kill Bill Volume 1 both made you $5 per buck you put in. Kill Bill Volume 2 is $4. And then Inglourious Basterds and Django are $3.59, $3.25 respectively. It is worth noting that while this is happening, the amount of money per Quentin Tarantino movie, like, in revenue, is going up. It's just going up roughly, in tandem with how much more it costs to make.
Well, the thing is that, to me, when you look at Reservoir Dogs, you had a fairly low budget,
1.2 million
actors being largely portraying the roles. And then when you look at Pulp Fiction, it's kind of like Quentin knew, like, the industry was like, go for it, right?
Yes.
And he really went for it, and the marketing was behind the movie a lot. When you look at, Jackie Brown, to me, I'm like, they know the commodity at this point. That you're the Quentin Tarantino audience. And as well, I think that you're starting to chase things like, Inglourious Basterds is a great example of, I want an all-star cast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, Quentin going, no, we're not going to go with an actor's actor, even though they could do a great job. I want Brad Pitt. I want, you know what I mean? Like he's going for it. So I will tell you the funny story. I think I've said it on here before about living in a small town.
Yep.
And going to see Pulp Fiction in the 90s. And I was of age. I was happy to go see an R-rated, I think it was R-rated. And I sat in a little shitty theater in Newmarket here. And I watched opening night of Pulp Fiction.
Yep.
And I was laughing so hard at the scene where, you know, a man gets his innocence taken. I was laughing so hard when Marvin's head exploded in the back of that car with John Travolta casually holding the gun, because I understood how Quentin was making you uncomfortable to make that funny.
Yep.
Right? Like there was an absurd relationship going on between a Quentin Tarantino audience and what was being put on film. However, the coup de grace was when Marvin's head went off.
Yep.
As the theater was emptying of the weak stomachs that couldn't handle this movie.
Yep.
One guy turned to me because I was in tears laughing. And he said, "You really are a sick fucking bastard."
Wow.
And he walked out. And I'm just like, oh my God, I just can't. Like, the joke was on him. He didn't get it. And I went back to see the movie in that same theater that weekend. And everybody in the theater got it. And I felt so much better about myself when the entire theater laughs and Marvin's head goes flying everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's Quentin Tarantino he's got his own market.
Yeah. Yeah. It was such a pop culture moment. Like, that the 90s was really defining itself and stretching and saying, we can put this on film and it's okay.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's a separate thing about why, like from a critical perspective, the 90s were probably the best decade for movies.
Oh yeah, I did my college thesis on Pulp Fiction. So
there you go. And now the worst director I delved into.
Oh boy.
Scorsese.
That doesn't shock me.
For every $1 you give Scorsese, you get $1.95 back. Sorry, $1.96.
At least you get something back.
Sorry. That's after Taxi. Okay. I divided his pre and post Taxi.
Okay.
Because average, including Taxi and Alice Doesn't Lie, which are his 2 big movies, if you include those 2, you get an average of $3.04 back.
Okay.
So, post-Taxi, Scorsese is not bringing the seats like he used to. It's worth noting that his second movie, Boxcar Bertha, appears to have fallen into a black hole, and no one has the box office numbers for it.
Interesting.
So, audience, if you can find those box office numbers, I would love to run it. I don't know how much that movie was. I have a note of it might have cost $600,000 to make. No one's quite sure.
Wow. I mean, the people who finance that are swimming with the fishes.
I mean, it wasn't a big movie. But, yeah, I mean, I will say, Scorsese appears to be a director that the less money you give him, the better.
Fair. Yeah, that I can see that statement probably holding true for a few directors, to be honest.
We're going to come to that more. Scorsese's interesting because a lot of directors, like Quentin Tarantino, as we talked about, as their career goes on, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger budgets. And Scorsese has had like repeated times where his budgets will all of a sudden take a huge dip.
I'd be curious. I now that we're talking about this and realizing it, I don't know. There's 2 directors that I would love to plug into this equation. I don't know if you did them, but M. Night Shyamalan.
I didn't do him.
I would be really curious to know the breakdown on him. And number 2 would be Kevin Smith.
I didn't do either of those. The reasoning being they're not blockbuster dudes.
No.
I do know also from some related research that M. Night Shyamalan is much like David Lynch in that he has one movie that did so well, it screws up all of the rest of his data and makes his average look very high, despite the fact nothing else was near it.
Well, and that would be the real meat of the potatoes, right? The meat and potatoes for me is that I think, like, you know, Seven and whatnot is just gonna just be this light that just gleans over everything, and then you're just gonna see a lot of failure, like a lot of box office rejection. Put it that way, like.
Yeah. I mean, what does it for M. Night Shyamalan is Split, which is off of a budget of $5 million, made $103 million.
Okay,
It's worth noting that James McAvoy alone would now cost you $5 million. Right? It's super weird. I mean, M. Night Shyamalan is 100% a director that it appears the less money you give him, the better.
Yes, and that was ultimately those two people to me would be directors that the less you give them, the better they are. I think they're challenged. They get more creative with the limited resource, because when you look at Clerks, which was shot for, you know, what, $25,000, like Kevin selling his comic book collection and taking out all kinds of credit card debt. When you look at that compared to his next movie, Mallrats, which I'm pretty sure hemorrhaged money and actually had a budget. Like,
the reason I didn't do Kevin Smith is actually I did some research into whether or not I should cover Kevin Smith, and multiple people who are smarter about movies than me basically took the position of Kevin Smith doesn't make movies for the box office.
Yeah,
Kevin Smith, for good or ill, makes movies to be watched at home on your CRT television. Even his modern movies are made to be watched on a CRT television.
Yeah,
and
100%.
I think there's something to that. I think Kevin Smith is, and I would argue that some of his stuff now especially shows his age, but he is a 90s, early aughts guy. That's his era.
A Kevin Smith movie, like, let's face it, is you're going to sit at home, you're going to roll a joint, and you're going to laugh hysterically at it. It's like watching Sausage Party or something. Like, it's just meant to be consumed while under the influence of something.
So I would do a slight pushback. I would say a Kevin Smith movie is meant to be watched with a joint and caffeine.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you want to be high, but you want to be like an energetic high and like playing with it. I think Sausage Party is you get really high and you're drinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like they're both high movies, but there's a slight difference.
Yeah. That's totally fair.
Yeah, and like Kevin Smith is not super my jam, but I get who he's for, and I think that he is very much like that spirit of people just a little older than me.
Yeah, and you're talking to him right now.
Right, it's exactly what I'm getting at, right? Is it's like Kevin Smith is a little bit too much of like, remember the 90s? And I'm like, yeah, I hated the 90s. I was 11 and lived in rural Manitoba.
Fair. So what's the deal with our last director out of those three, Ridley Scott? Because this one you've been teasing over me for a while now, because Ridley has been in the news a lot lately and seems to have an opinion, whether we want to hear it or not. So
Ridley Scott has not had a great ROI on a movie. So Ridley Scott underperforms the Hollywood average. Based upon what people say you want to make on a Hollywood movie, Ridley Scott shouldn't get hired.
That doesn't surprise me.
The movie, he has made 2 movies that lost money, and they were his 3rd and 4th movies.
Oh no.
White Skull, which for every dollar you put in, you got 27 cents.
Wow.
And G.I. Jane, which for every dollar you put in, you got 96 cents back.
Wow.
It's also worth noting that a lot of his movies don't even double your money, which from a Hollywood perspective for a blockbuster guy is not good. It's worth noting, like Blade Runner,
Yeah.
again, theatrical release underperformed.
Yep. Oh yeah, that
Everyone
movie.
knows that if you know Blade Runner, but also like the list of his movies that didn't even double their money is like Black Hawk Down, Robin Hood, All the Money in the World, Exodus: Gods and Men, Matchstick Men, Kingdom of Heaven, Goodyear. All of those didn't double the money.
Wow.
Which, like, as we're gonna see, comparing to the big names in blockbusters, these don't do well.
What about Alien? How did it
Alien
go?
is his saving grace, having made $9.66 for every dollar you put in.
Okay. So that was the one. Like, we have to remember something about the movie Alien, all right? So just so our audience recalls.
Yep.
That movie was one of the first movies when I was a kid. I watched it and I realized what movie making was about. Because the spacesuits that they used aboard the Nostromo had hockey gloves.
Yep.
The gloves.
Yeah.
And I was watching it going, that's a prop. That's a Canadian staple prop.
Yep.
And maybe you won't notice it in the States because hockey's not as big, but it stood out right away to me. And I'm like, oh, they can't move their thumbs because those things are,
It's
the
this,
fixed
a
thumb.
locked in straight line.
So
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, so they just spray painted that, and that's a spacesuit.
Yep.
Okay.
If you cut out Alien, Ridley Scott makes an average of $2.28 per dollar you put in.
Which is still not terrible in Hollywood terms.
No, that is not good in blockbuster terms.
In blockbuster, no, but
yeah.
I mean, like he could B-movie himself to a career.
Yep. It is worth noting, The Martian is his second best ROI film ever.
Interesting.
But I think that was a combination of the power of that book and the cultural moment and Matt Damon.
Yep, all those things combined.
Yeah. Plus, it's worth noting, part of that is The Martian was one of the first really big movies not one of the first. The Martian did really, really well in China. It's worth noting. If you think about the plot of the book and or the plot of the movie, the Chinese government is an important part of it. And
yes,
China is involved in movie making a lot right now. And they like funding movies that are pro-China propaganda. If you think about The Meg, starring Jason Statham, if you think about Great Wall, like China loves some movies right now that have a white lead but makes China look good.
Yeah, and apparently they have a problem with Disney, right? Like with some of Disney's movies because stances from actors, etc.
Yep.
Being publicly outspoken can be a death knell for your project if it was targeted for a Chinese market.
100%. 100%.
Politics. Yikes.
Politics. But yeah, it's worth noting that his Alien movies are among his better performing, broadly speaking. Covenant made $2.48 for every dollar in. Prometheus made $3.10 for every dollar in.
I liked Prometheus and Covenant.
They were decent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Ridley Scott is too enamored with his own early work and needs to keep being inventive. But
yeah, he needs to let it go.
Yeah.
But I think that well is too tempting to go back to, especially if they're going to be strong performers. The words are always there that he wants to revisit X, Y, and Z. And even with when we talked about on the show, the show that he did with the androids, right? Raised by Wolves.
Yep.
We're like, that's supposed to be a separate world from Alien, and yet there's tie-ins. Right?
So it is worth, yeah.
Yeah. He's doing this, and he's openly talked about the fact that the Blade Runner world is in the same world as Aliens.
Allegedly. I don't know if he can actually confirm that because of a bunch of other rules about who owns what IP.
About who owns what IP, yeah. True.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yep.
He likes to itch the audience on, so to speak.
Yes. So, comic movies.
Mm-mm.
So we're going to speak broadly here. We're talking anything Marvel or anything DC.
Okay.
Broadly speaking, this further supports in general, Marvel movies have a better ROI than DC movies.
Not shocking.
However, there are two standout directors from the Marvel side who bring back the first one, for every dollar you put in, you're gonna get about $10 back.
Whoa.
And the second one, for every dollar you put in... Oh, no, she's not in the Marvel side. Never mind. Yeah. And do you know who that is? Who the best ROI is in the Marvel side?
To be honest, I'm going to say this, and I think the audience, there's going to be a portion of the audience that is there with me.
Yep.
I think largely with the MCU movies, I get less concerned about who's directing it.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's basically produced by a brainchild council.
Yeah.
That's sitting there guiding everything. Like it to me, when you see the success of a character or a movie, you go, I'm more interested in the actor or the success of the comic book character than I am about the production facility, because it just feels like the big machine at Disney is driving.
Yep.
But so who is it?
Ryan Coogler,
Okay.
who did Black Panther.
Yeah.
His movies, Fruitvale Station, had an ROI of 19.3. Creed was 4.34.
Mm-hmm.
And Black Panther was $6.74.
All great films.
All great films.
And he got a lot of leeway, I think, with all of those characters. He's definitely able to leave an imprint of his work. So.
I think I think you're right. I think he also knows how to play well with others.
Yes, an essential skill.
I think that if we're going to transition for a moment to someone, because you had the example of whether or not a movie comes out of a brain trust.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do a little bit of sidestep because this is a great transition. We have one director who every time when he works with Disney, makes a worse ROI than his non-Disney films.
Oh, jeez.
And do you know who it is?
Who?
It's one Rian Johnson.
Oh, we're kicking at the hornet's nest.
Numbers don't lie. Brick, Looper, and Knives Out all significantly outperformed Last Jedi on an ROI basis.
Yeah.
That being said, Last Jedi had by far the biggest box office.
Yeah.
Hey, four times Knives Out.
Let's just look at the fact that a Star Wars movie, even if it's laden with that much controversy, I'm not even going to put an opinion out about it. When it's laden with that much controversy, is still going to gate like madness because it's Star Wars, and the fans have to see it in order to talk about it, right? That opening weekend, it was bonkers. I was there in a pre-release show.
Yeah, me too.
And I walked out and I was just like, I don't know if that's the Star Wars I was expecting. And I didn't go back to it. And I think with Force Awakens, I was looking for any excuse to go watch that movie again. Like, I came home and I was like, hey, Dad, when's the last time you went to the movies? Oh, like 20 years ago. Come on, my treat. Like, let's go to a matinee. Here. People like dates and everything. Have you seen the new Star Wars? No? Let's go see it. Rogue One, probably saw it about 20 times in the theater. Could not get
Rogue One, I think, is one of the Star Wars movies that improves the most with more watches.
Yes, and that's what I was finding in my return to the theater, because the Force Awakens for me was just, yay, Star Wars is back, and it didn't suck, right? It was predictable. That's our J.J. Abrams, I'm sure. But yeah, with Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker, God forbid, and Solo, once was enough in the theater for me.
I
can only imagine that hurts the box for those, movies by committee.
We'll see. We'll see with some of these other numbers. You know what? Speaking of movies by committee, let's go to Patty Jenkins.
Oh boy.
So
Wonder Woman.
This is Wonder Woman. So it is widely discussed whether or not Wonder Woman 84 was hurt, like whether or not that was Patty Jenkins' mistake or that was the committee's mistake.
I think in our analysis of that, we broke down where we could see 3 different directors fighting in that movie.
At least 2. At least J.J. Abrams and Patty Jenkins.
Yeah.
You know, Wonder Woman 1984 is technically in that COVID range.
Yep.
But based upon the box office, it lost money.
I'm not surprised. That was one of the first direct to stream.
Yeah.
Big movies, right? Like,
so I did run the average for Patty Jenkins, both with and without Wonder Woman 84. And it's worth noting that even with Wonder Woman 1984, she outperforms a lot of big names in terms of ROI. So her average, including Wonder Woman 84, is $4.78 per dollar in.
That's pretty good.
Without it is $6.75.
That's even better.
And now we're going to get to the 4 big names to compare against that.
Here we go. Buckle up.
4 big names. So these are the ones that started this. These are your Zack Snyder, J.J. Abrams, Michael Bay, and Christopher Nolan. All known for huge swings. Culturally, undeniably, they've had huge hits.
God, that list makes me cringe.
It's worth noting, I did run the numbers for Tenet for Christopher Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have the not including that average for him.
Okay.
Because that non-Tenet average bumps him up a few points.
Again, another COVID film, right? Like
that's why I'm flagging it as done separately. We also, for Zack Snyder, don't include Army of the Dead because it didn't have a box office.
Yeah. That's between him and Netflix.
So, even including Wonder Woman 1984, Patty Jenkins outperforms all 4 of those men on an ROI basis.
Wow. And the funny thing about Patty Jenkins is the news is all awash with conspiracy theories that she's pulled off of her Star Wars project.
I mean, yeah. That's gonna be a thing.
It speaks to maybe she doesn't play well with others on these movies by committee. If Wonder Woman 84, we can definitely see something was rotten in Denmark. Maybe that's carried over when, Lucasfilm are there saying, when we say jump, your answer is how high. And
possibly.
She's not doing that, but maybe there's something else going on. Who knows?
I also think that Patty Jenkins is widely disliked, which leads to a lot of media coverage being sensational on her.
Okay.
We've talked about Kennedy, Kathleen Kennedy, am I about right?
Yep.
She's just, whether she's good or not, she's just disliked.
Yeah. Well, again, as a producer, her record speaks for itself.
And that's part of what we're trying to do here is look at what the actual record speaks.
Yeah.
It is worth noting that Patty Jenkins only has 3 movies under her belt.
Yeah.
So 2 big successes pull that number up a lot. Right? But one of Patty Jenkins' successes is Monster, which was an $8 million budget and made $64 million.
That was a great movie.
Great movie. Yeah. But those smaller budget movies with a good ROI, that bumps your number right up.
Yeah. And that put her on the map.
Yep. 100%. But that brings us to stuff like... But yeah, she outperforms all 4 of those fellas. We're going to do Christopher Nolan first, because the other 3, I think, are better discussed as a group, as a compare and contrast.
Okay.
Christopher Nolan is the odd fellow who, if we're not including Tenet, where he did really well, and then dips below the Hollywood average, and then recovers.
Okay.
So, like, his first two movies are Following and Memento,
Okay.
which both have very small budgets.
Yeah.
And then make real good money.
Yeah.
Following makes $8.08 for every dollar in. Memento makes $4.44.
Okay.
Insomnia, Batman Begins, and Prestige all make less than a 300% return on investment. So for every dollar you put in, you're getting $2.74 back at the best.
Let's not forget, like, that Batman Begins was a big money project.
I mean, it was $150 million to make, and the box office was $373 million.
Yep.
So,
I'm just saying, like, that was a real landmark movie.
Yep. Well, and then you start to see it, where, as we talked about, whether or not sequels make more money. The Dark Knight was $185 million, so not that much more of a budget, and made $1 billion.
But that movie, was that the one with
Ledger?
Ledger, yeah. So the Joker. So that one was a huge draw, right? Like,
It was a huge draw.
Like, you couldn't get away from it.
The marketing was phenomenal for that.
Yep.
I mean, the other side is I think Batman Begins, post box office, continued to gain momentum.
If I recall correctly, at the time when Batman Begins came in, it wasn't the Michael Keaton Batman Tim Burton era, right? Like, there wasn't a huge amount of marketing around it. It was more so like, we're going to do this version of Batman. We know it's going to be super successful. We've secured a great director for it. And then we're going to put it out there, and then the ball's going to start rolling. It was a very chanced, contrived thing, in my opinion.
I'm with you.
That movie, it was different to me, it was like every geek watched it and then went to a bar and talked about how great it was.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like, that was the way that movie built. And then the rest of them were just like, guess what? We're all geeks now.
Yep.
Like let's have fun with this.
Yeah. It is also worth noting that, like, Dark Knight Rises was twice the budget of Batman Begins.
Right.
Makes sense. And made $1.081 billion.
Yeah.
So an ROI of $3.60.
It's a lot of money we're talking about.
Yep. I mean, and interestingly, looking at this data, don't give Christopher Nolan more than $150 million.
Right.
Like, separately, like, looking at these numbers, if you give Christopher Nolan $150 million, that's your best bet. As soon as you give him more than that, it starts to go down in value, which is interesting. He seems to do really well at about that budget.
Well, it's diminishing returns too, right? Like, how many times and again, I'm broadly speaking here.
Yep.
But when those movies were coming out, everybody that I knew was going to see them at least once in the theater.
Sure.
It was a cultural phenomenon in the sense that we were going to the movie theater more than I've ever gone to the movie theater in my life, because we had Lord of the Rings. We had constant draws to the box office, and much more to me than it is now with Marvel and its assault on viewers, in the sense that there's 23 movies for this, genre of Marvel MCU-ness, but you're going to space that all out. Like, even if COVID never hit, you're going to space that out on DVD, home, you know what I mean, and theater. Like, I really want to see the Hulk, but I'm going to wait for it to be on my television, because I'm not going to take that chance on it, versus going to see Iron Man in the theater and standing up and cheering. You know what I mean? Like there's a different thing. But at that time, those movies, everybody was going to the theater, and there's got to be a cap to that. Like, no matter how much money you spend to get that money on film, there's only so much an audience can give you to see your product before it just is like, well, I don't want to see that 20 times.
Yep.
I want to go see Lord of the Rings. Like,
I'm with you.
so movie theater companies have to know what that number is, like that ratio.
I think the other part of it though is for some of these the ROI doesn't matter.
Right.
Right? Because I think part of Dark Knight Rises and part of the Marvel movies becomes how much are your actor salaries going up?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are like a bunch of these movies here that their entire budget is less than Robert Downey Jr.'s salary for Avengers.
Right.
Not even Avengers like Endgame, where he's making a lot more. Like, actor salaries can very quickly start to balloon.
Well, and imagine like an Endgame, right, where you have Chris Evans. You've got so much.
Yeah. I mean,
Scarlett Johansson, like, ugh.
So much. 100%.
Christopher Pratt. Like,
Yep.
All that stuff is costing money. Like, what's James Gunn saying now? This is going to be the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie that he's going to do.
So,
and
I mean,
he's just like, and they're like, Bradley Cooper no longer, they can't afford him to be Rocket.
Yeah, so there's a separate part of that, which is also Screen Actor Guild requirements for contracts and stuff of like, there's only a certain number of movies you can, after a certain number of movies, you have to have a raise for a bunch of reasons. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And now the big three: Zack Snyder, Michael Bay, J.J. Abrams, who are the three that brought us to this.
Oh, jeez, Michael Bay. Oh God.
Let's talk about Michael Bay.
What's the lady that he always puts in it? Megan Fox.
He used to put Megan Fox in a lot.
Does her butt get part of the box office here?
I didn't look into actors and stuff.
I know, I'm just making a joke because it felt to me like every time a Transformers movie or something would come out, there was going to be gratuitous butt shots.
I mean, that is, look, Quentin Tarantino has a thing for feet. Michael Bay has a thing for butts.
Yeah.
And minors. Also, Marky Mark. It's worth noting, I think he has as many movies with Mark Wahlberg as with Megan Fox.
I don't track Mark Wahlberg.
Here's my next question for you. Here's the next fun little question.
Yes.
Do you think Michael Bay's Transformers movies do worse or better than the rest of his movies?
Worse.
You're wrong.
Oh! Well, they keep making them. So.
The average ROI for a Michael Bay movie is $3.70.
Wow.
The average for just the Transformers movies is $4.18.
Oh man. My
faith
in humanity right now. And the worst part is the best Transformers movie, he didn't even do much for it. That was Bumblebee. That actually had a compelling story. It was touching.
It's worth noting, Dark Side of the Moon and Age of Extinction, both had an ROI of above $5.
Oh, shit. Oh, my God. Excuse my French. Wow.
So, similar to how we said, you want to give Christopher Nolan about 150.
Yeah.
You want to give Michael Bay about 200 million to 210.
Oh, and it's all going to be CGI.
It's where he puts his money.
That and Megan Fox's bum.
I mean, no, he's actually notoriously does not pay women well, and he just fires them.
Oh, that's true, because they got rid of her. Oh, yeah.
They got rid of her very quick. Yeah, and then he proceeded to do a bunch of interviews where he shit-talked her.
Yeah, she got douched. That's right. Oh, my gosh. I'm sorry. As a human being, I don't really enjoy Michael Bay. His movies have this style, and it maybe works when you're 20 for you, and then it becomes really, really. There's only so many overhead crane shots and whatnot that I can take in a movie, and he pushes that limit. Even he did a movie on Netflix with Ryan Reynolds, and even then I'm like, holy shit, there's no mistaking Michael Bay did this. Like
The 6 Underground, or
yeah, something like
yeah.
that. It was with the cars and everything, and I'm just
it was
like
the billionaire wanted to create his own
yeah. And
intelligence
just the way that
agency.
they shot the car scenes and everything, I'm like, this is so Michael Bay. Like, this
Yep.
is just Michael Bay. Like, and if I can notice that in a movie, I guess maybe I notice it with Quentin Tarantino. Like, there is a style, right? Like you say, the feet, but all the long dialogue and the no cuts and stuff like that. I get it.
Yep.
Oh,
And now for a gentleman who I don't know. We're talking about Zack Snyder. So we're not including Army of the Dead, and we're not including the Snyder Cut. Nothing against them. They both just were online releases. They don't have box office.
Quantify them. Yeah, exactly.
That's, you can send your angry email about I should have talked about that. That's not what we're covering today.
Right.
Do you think Zack Snyder does better with non-DC movies or with DC movies?
I'm
Bum, bum.
going to say non.
Correct. But it's because of only one goddamn movie.
Oh, God.
What do you think was his best ROI movie?
I don't have a list of his movies in front of me.
Watchmen, Legend of the Guardians, Sucker Punch, Man of Steel, Justice League, Army of the Dead, 300, Dawn of the Dead, Batman v Superman.
Okay. Well, there's some movies I really like in there. But I know that they didn't do well. Like, Dawn of the Dead probably is his highest.
300.
Yeah. 300. Oh, okay. Yeah. That was another cultural phenomenon. You had to go see 300.
It was, look, every single man going in and pretending they weren't a little bit gay.
Yeah.
Because that movie had abs for days. Dawn of the Dead is close. Dawn of the Dead, for every dollar that went in, you got $6.20.
Yeah, but to me, that was the earlier one, right? Like
it is the earlier one.
Yeah, so
300.
I'm thinking that's how he got his job. Like, and then he perfected it with 300.
Also worth noting, written by James Gunn.
300 was.
No, Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, Dawn. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was him and James Gunn, and I mean, then there's a weird little fight about a thing that Snyder changed. But anyways, 300 made $10.26 for $1 in.
Not shocking.
And then Zack Snyder slouches into broad mediocrity.
Hey, he's got flair.
Sorry, mediocrity in terms of his ROI.
Yes.
So remember, the goal for a blockbuster movie person is $3 out for every $1 in, as we established earlier.
Yeah.
He misses that more often than he hits it.
That's not shocking to me.
Justice League, Sucker Punch, Legends of the Guardians, and Watchmen all make less than that.
Now, which one is Legend of the Guardians?
That is, I believe, that is his Owls of Ga'Hoole kid one.
That was a great bloody movie.
I don't know anything.
McGregor was in it, I believe. Ewan McGregor did voicing in that one. That was such a great movie to me.
I don't see Ewan McGregor in it. I see Helen Mirren, Jeffrey Rush, Jim Sturgis, Hugo Weaving, Emily Barclay.
Sturgis, that's it.
That's what you're thinking
of. I'm just gonna say it. Like, that was one of the best movies, animated movies I've seen. I did not ever consider that he was at the helm with that.
Yep.
Now, that and Sucker Punch doesn't surprise me. I enjoyed Sucker Punch for what it was. That was just a totally pulp, oversexed romp.
Yep.
Of action. Like,
yeah.
It was a baseline story and whatnot, but I found it was rather interesting. Like, I found that there was enough compelling stuff in it. But I would have pegged that as way earlier in his career.
No, because it was his weird like self project. It's also worth noting that is the only thing he has done. Sucker Punch that's not based on someone else's.
Right.
Everything else he has done is based on a comic or someone else's movie.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, interesting.
Legend of Guardians, that's based on a kid's series.
Yeah.
Army of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead is based on Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah. Yeah,
Zack
these are
Snyder,
all things,
yeah.
that they mine from.
So your average for Zack Snyder, not including 300 or Dawn of the Dead, is $3.05.
Still not horrible.
But barely where you want to be for blockbuster material.
Yeah.
And it is only above that because of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. Justice League,
Superman, like, ugh.
It had a good ROI though. I think solely because of Batman versus Superman is the market.
Yeah, because that was the title, right? Like,
yeah.
Who doesn't want to go see it, even if it sucks?
100%.
Like
100%.
Batman versus Superman, yeah.
And then we should talk about his average is $4.27 ROI.
Interesting.
And then
didn't do as bad as I thought.
J.J. Abrams.
J.J. Abrams. This week on Top Gear, J.J. Abrams.
Not counting Star Wars. What do you think is his best ROI movie?
Oh, dear Lord. Super 8.
You got it!
Yeah! I tried to think. Not Star Trek.
Yep. Another gentleman who basically only does adaptations of other people's work. He's got Mission Impossible and the 2 Star Trek films, which again, 4 blockbuster numbers, both all underperform.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Mission Impossible 3. I'm not sure if I said that or
not. One of the Mission Impossibles. That's all we need to really know.
Yeah. And all 3 of those, all 3, like Mission Impossible did the best of those 3. Star Trek Into Darkness made $2.46 for every dollar.
Oh yeah, that one got killed.
Yeah.
I remember being underwhelmed by that.
Force Awakens made $6.76. But again, it was the first Star Wars movie.
Oh yeah, like that's the one I went back to like 15 times.
Yep. And it's worth noting that Star Wars Rise of Skywalker is $3.92. So on an ROI basis, it does not do as good as Last Jedi.
That's not surprising. But as we've discussed, that movie is a bit of a dumpster fire.
Yep.
Like, and audiences know it. I only need to see this one once. And then I will be telling my kids, I saw it.
Yeah, right? It is worth noting that Star Trek and Star Wars both have this phenomenon of their ROIs are both going down over time.
Right. Well, again, it's not shocking. Like, look, if Disney put the timing in that they did with the MCU, if they had a better, like, if Lucasfilm had a better tact with those 3 movies in terms of linking the stories better and making sure that direction and filmmaking understood what the project was versus the all-out, I know they all deny it, but it's clear to the fan base that there was a bloody war between J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's specifically what it was. I think it was a little bit of a one-sided.
Well, yeah, I think Rian did what he wanted to do.
Yeah,
and then JJ was left with picking it up.
Yeah,
and he took shots.
And this isn't me defending Rian Johnson so much as like Rian Johnson said, I want to do a bunch of crazy stuff and upend the entire cart.
Yep. And
he was given the go ahead, right?
Yeah. Because everybody said, sure, thumbs up, do it.
Corporate signed off on this.
Yeah. Like let's not. I get it, and that's the damage control. He doesn't want to get into the fight because the fight to him wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right. And even JJ will sit here and deny that there was a fight, but it's undeniable in the execution when they take shots like, about Luke throwing away the lightsaber and stuff like that. There was direct references within Rise of Skywalker that went after the event The Last Jedi on
all of a
creative
sudden,
basis.
we set up Rey's a nobody. Actually, no, she's not.
Yeah, exactly. When you have to, do that and revet the whole thing in universe, it's hard not to say, to go back and do a little bit of finger pointing there. But that's life, right? Like, I wish that franchise, because I think it could have challenged on the numbers differently, but it is what it is, right? There's numbers don't lie, and audiences. That's one of the great things, is that we as audience members get to plunk down our hard-earned money, whether it be for a streaming service or for admission into a movie theater, and kind of determine some of these outcomes, right? Like, this is all numbers that we've helped assemble in terms
100%.
of our own pocketbooks.
100%. I also think there's some interesting larger stories that come out of this. I mean, I think that, Zack Snyder as the de facto or actual head of the DCEU, I think that tells an interesting story of he set stuff up, but then, like, Justice League does really poorly. And, you can say part of that is Joss Whedon, and I think that that's not wrong, given how much, especially the story is that him and Joss Whedon and him did not have the same vision for that movie.
Right.
I also think, I think, with how much the reshoots cost for Justice League, I think it wasn't ready when he left. Like, it wasn't a good movie then.
I believe that when we look back with the context of history, we know that Zach wanted to do that movie, but circumstances were outside of his control. In the passing of one of his kids, I believe, a suicide or some tragic accident or something. But anyhow, he had to take family time. He had to be away from the industry. And I respect that. And DC were like, well, we've got this hot property and we're just getting killed by Marvel. Like, the temperature was pretty intense on DC, as it still is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're up against, you're David against Goliath. And what are you going to do? Hey, guess what? There's been 2 really successful Avengers movies, and they were both under Joss Whedon. Let's grab him.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, he seems to be minting money. It's the same thing as to why DC went out and grabbed a guy like James Gunn, who got the boot out of Disney for a while, and they said, hey, help us with this Suicide Squad mess.
And
he did it.
And based upon transitioning it to the show, especially, did real well. I do think it's worth noting, another story that I think is here, is the demonstration of how much more money is, right? Like, Wonder Woman, the first one, I think had the lowest budget of any DC movie.
Right.
And is the best performing on an ROI basis.
I feel bad for saying this.
Yeah.
But we all know that in Hollywood, there's a great pay discrepancy if you're a female actress, right? Like, if you're a female, you're not commanding as much as a male counterpart, like a Tom Cruise or whatever. Like, that's been part of the battle of Scarlett Johansson and other big name draws. And I think Wonder Woman was a classic example of DC putting lower money on a known commodity to see what the reaction would be. Like, to deliberately underfund a movie and say, well, how many people are going to remember? I remember as a kid watching Wonder Woman on TV.
Yeah.
And that show and everything like that. And Wonder Woman was part of the fabric of growing up. Like, I talk to my friends who absolutely love Wonder Woman 1984. And I'm like freaking out. Are you kidding me? That movie was a train wreck as a film. But they are so enamored with the nostalgia of Wonder Woman that they can't see any harm with it. And I'm like, damn, good for you guys. I'm glad you enjoyed it that much.
Yeah, rock on.
But I just see that cynically, just looking at the motivation of the studios, I'm not surprised that Wonder Woman is the lowest funded. I'm not surprised that, because they can get away with it. Yeah. And it benefits their pocketbook.
Oh, for sure. And a lot of these people cannot make the same ROI they once did.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the ones that break that model tend to have something else going on. Your Lucas, who's because he created and masterminded this whole IP.
Mm-hmm.
And then honestly got out. Right? It is worth noting that like Star Wars Episode 3 performed real well, even after Episode 2 underperformed. And underperformed, I mean, only made $5.69 for every dollar in. Which for a Star Wars movie, that's below average.
When I watch that movie, I found a way to watch it years ago.
Sure.
I can cut it in half just by creative fast forwarding on the DVD.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't want to see, let's have a blossoming romance on, with Padme and that kind of crap. I want to see the action because the action's really good in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Phantom Menace, I'd have to fast forward the whole thing to the end.
I also think another interesting thing that goes on here is the difference between how profitable a movie is in raw numbers versus ROI versus critical acclaim.
Yeah.
Right? Because, like, Michael Bay gets shit on all the time for critical acclaim. He does poorly. But in terms of if you were investing your money, he's better than Abrams and Snyder almost.
But isn't that back to, I guess, currently, like, just looking at today's culture, and that the debate happens every year when we talk about the Oscars.
Yep.
That the movies that are put up sometimes for the Oscars, it's not like they're necessarily bad movies or anything, but they're not the movies that are consumed with the highest gate at the box office. Like, just this year alone, look at the controversy that's existed around Spider-Man No Way Home isn't on the best pictures list, and yet, that was probably the big winner at the box office, right? Like that made that has a lot of attention on it. That has a lot of eyeballs on it.
Yep.
Right? Like,
yeah.
That's what people are consuming the most of. And I totally get the argument about the art form versus what is being churned, right? Like the pulp of the movies right now, where it's like,
for sure,
superhero movies are ruining the industry and all that. I can totally buy that argument. Like, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that my attitude personally towards awards, like the Oscars, is that it is as much about planning for the future health of the industry as it is about recognizing good stuff right now. And, I think that a lot of the time, the movie that made the most money, like, it doesn't need an award as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't say that to be like, I stick by my original point of, like, Spider-Man No Way Home. Like, if you were to watch it and not watch any of the other movies, it doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Yeah, and even then, there's a lot of movie packed in there. Like, to me, I wouldn't put Spider-Man No Way Home in there, but something like Dune or something. I know you didn't like that, but I'm just saying, like, to me, there's a lot of redeeming stuff. It's a classic story. There's a lot of art being delivered to us. Whether or not it's your type of thing, that's fine. That's debatable. That's art. Like, that's
you could definitely make the argument to me about Dune a lot easier than.
Yeah, and that was, one of my quandaries about that. But that's life. You know what I mean? Like I think the Academy Awards. My dad asked me, he said, why the hell are we wasting all this energy and time on the Academy Awards? And I said, because it's a measuring stick.
It's
because we pull that information up 10, 20 years from now, and you look at what's there, if you pull that movie and watch it, I'm like, you can sit here and by today's standards go, okay, Gone with the Wind was this, or The Sound of Music was that at that time. And where's the movies 20 years later? Where's the movies 40 years later?
Mm-hmm.
And the Academy Awards shows you a quality section of it. Not necessarily, you can go back and look at the biggest movie and watch that too in that context. Like, there's nothing stopping you.
Yeah.
Statistics are statistics, but this is recognizing the art form.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the long and the short of it. Again, like, if you want more like this, I know it was a lot of numbers. I'm about to send Phil the link for the show notes. But yeah, if you liked this and you want more like this, let us know. We have been having a lot of discussions about, how people seem to want us to go more in depth, and that becomes tricky of how in depth is more.
Yes. And how to make it entertaining, right? Like, how to bring the listeners along on the ride and have it be engaging, I guess.
Yep. 100%.
But I'm pretty happy with where we've arrived in terms of this deep dive. So I want to thank you, Tyler, for all of your hard work in putting that together, because I was the lucky benefactor here in just being along for the ride. So
I will say that literally earlier today when I was double checking some of my numbers, I found a website that if I had learned how to use the site, I could have automated this entire process. So maybe that'll be the follow-up in a year or two.
yeah, and we can just plug the numbers in and
So good.
find out where we're at, right? So that's excellent. So if you would like to get in contact with us or track down where our podcast is, around or on, you can hit us up at www.itscanonpodcast.com. You can look us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at It's Canon Podcast. You can shoot us an email at show@itscanonpodcast. You can find our podcast on any spot where you find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, anywhere where you find your podcast, you're going to find the It's Canon Podcast. So please leave a rate and review if the platform allows for it, and be sure to tell a friend. So that's our show for this week. Just want to let you know, the best part about the show, it's the podcast where we talk about all things geek, all things movies, all things shows, all things comics, all things pop culture. You know what the best part of it all is, Tyler?
It's all in canon.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.